Well, I say it all the time. Leadership is hard, but let's not make it harder than it needs to be. And after all these years, I'm still amazed by the things we do to make our work harder than it needs to be. As leaders and managers and supervisors, the work that we do to influence people to do better and to be better is hard enough, but we often unwittingly make it harder than it needs to be. So whether you're a leader or not, I don't think you set out to deliberately make things harder. I certainly don't. I don't get up in the morning and pound dark coffee and clench my fists and my teeth and say, I'm going to head into this day and do everything the hard way. Nobody does that, right? But follow some people around for a hot minute, and I'm sure it looks like that's exactly what they're doing. Why is that? Well, maybe they think that what they're doing is actually going to make things easier. I get that. But what we do to make things easier, often, if we don't think correctly, does the opposite. It makes it easy for now, but harder in the long term. They think what they're doing works. They're running around putting quick fixes in place that make things feel better for now, but create real problems later. Maybe another reason why we make things harder than it needs to be is maybe we're keeping score of the wrong things. Or another reason is maybe we just have an obstinate, pugnacious streak, a mile wide, running right down the center of our heart. And we say out loud sometimes, or certainly in our head, ain't nobody gonna tell me what to do. You're not the boss of me. In some people, that attitude is so strong that they won't even tell themselves what to do. They react to the promises that they've made to themselves, like someone else is telling them what to do. That's some deep, messed up stuff right there. So when I watch the dumpster fires and slow motion train wrecks created by that kind of a mindset, I want to ask myself, and maybe even them, so how's that working for you? So with affection, I really do want to ask you the same question. How's that working for you? As I said in part one of this little short series, and we're linking part one right up here, we all construct rules for our life. Even people who are fiercely independent, as they proudly like to call themselves, create and live by rules for their life. If you pay attention, you'll hear people say their rules. You'll watch them then live by their rules. If you pay attention to yourself, you'll probably even hear yourself think and speak and act out your rules of life too. So you've been probably creating those rules and editing them for quite some time. If you face a challenge of time or talent or wisdom, or a challenge of energy or resources or interpersonal conflict, for more than a couple of times, you'll quickly create a rule. So what do your rules of life sound like? I don't know, maybe they sound like, I'll never hire a person like Biff again, or I'll never overcommit my calendar again, or I will always count the cost before I make any commitments or I make any promises. Maybe you have a rule of life that says, I'm not going to make any important decisions when I'm tired. You're tired all the time. Maybe you have a rule that says, I'm never going to tell that story again about myself, or I'll never make that kind of risk again. You know, I could keep going, but I really don't want to poke the bruise, right? At least not right now, not at the beginning of this video. Wait for the next one, right? So here's the deal. You already have collections of rules for your life. They were put in place over your lifetime so far. They're very powerful. They're like laws of physics, and they shape you. But unlike laws of physics, you created these rules and you put them in place. So, how's that working for you? What do your rules of life look like? You probably have a rule, or maybe several rules, around your friendships, around your tight and your loose relationships, around your family. You have rules around time and about how you use time and how you plan, and about what's a waste of time and what's a great use of your time. You've got rules around the roles that you may experience: leader, friend, parent, aunt, uncle, brother, sister. team member, creator, implementer, I don't know, teacher, musician, builder, and on it goes, right? You've got rules around roles, the roles that you play and the roles that other people play as well. So which of those roles are more important to you than other roles, and why? Well, you've got rules about that too. You probably have a rule about money, and you have a rule about health, and you have rules about rest and recuperation. You probably have rules about frustration and what to do with it, and maybe about loneliness and disappointment and conflict, and you have rules about what you always do when you cope with those experiences. So you get the idea. We all have created these rules for life, and we make them and we use them, and they work, or they kind of work for now anyway. Most of these rules were created to help us deal with the hard stuff of life, and we made these rules in an attempt to, like I said earlier, not make life harder than it needs to be. And they kind of work. But here's the catch. Once we create these rules and use them, and they work, at least for now, we treat those rules like they are laws, almost like laws of physics, like never touch a hot stove, right? Maybe it starts to sound like never trust people, or never tell people what you really think. Never do that. So you get the idea. These rules all start with never or always. So what are your rules? Try it out a little bit. When A happens, I always or never do B. You probably did it today. What was that like for you today? So lean in with me. It's just you and I right here. Nobody's looking over your shoulder. Nobody's watching this YouTube video with you. When you get some sense of what your rules are and the rules you use for life, how's that working for you? When we take a look at our rules, plural, our rules of life, and then when we zoom out and look at this stack of rules that we have created over time, we'll start to see what the ancient philosophers have called a rule of life. We may have a dozen or 2 dozen of these rules, but when we put them all together, they're like chapters in a good book, or they're like a jigsaw puzzle. They put together become one thing, what those wise folks of the past have called our rule of life. It might be easier to see in other people than, of course, like I said earlier, than you can see in yourself. So if you think of someone you know fairly well and bring him or her to mind right now, and think of them in a pressured or conflict situation, or think of them when they are lonely or when they are tired or when they are angry. Think of what they do and what they always do. I'll bet you could answer what is his or her rule of life with pretty high accuracy. So, what are the rules of the people who work most closely with you? Watch them. They'll show you what they are. Stack a few of their rules together and you'll be able to see pretty quickly and pretty obviously their rule of life. So, here's my challenge to you. Take some time today or this week and pay close attention. The rule of life by which people around you live and by which you live will become apparent. For example, you'll find that almost every conflict you face at work is because, 1, the rules that people use are in conflict with one another, or 2, the rules that people have in their rule of life don't work, or 3, the rules that they have are about feeling good rather than doing good and being good. And look at yourself as an example. If you've shied away from doing the right thing because you're afraid of a strong emotional reaction from people around you, your rule is feel good always trumps do good. So how's that working for you? Probably not very well. You're setting yourself up to be increasingly stressed and anxious. That just means that your rule doesn't work. So it's probably time for a new rule. Then if you zoom out and when you put that feel good trumps doing good rule together with a few other really powerful rules in your life. And when you look at the entire jigsaw puzzle of your rules, you'll say a rule of life. Your rule of life. Do you like what you see? So in the first video of this series that we have linked here as well, I ask you to think through this quick 5-question test to see if it's time for you to update your rule of life and work. So here are the 5 questions. Number 1, are you emotionally reactive to other people's problems and you soak them up, making them yours, and then you let them change what you do, especially when doing so is not the right thing to do? Second question, do you have the ability to do what's right even when those around you hate it? Third question, do you measure the quality of your leadership and your life based upon how people around you make you feel? Do you need to be liked all the time? And do you change direction so that people like you? Here's the fourth question. Do you adapt to challenge and difficulty and pain by distracting yourself from it rather than leaning into it and addressing it? And here's the fifth question. Do you invest in relationships with people who you want to emulate? So ask yourself these 5 questions, and you'll begin to see your rule of life. How's that working for you? So let's get real. If you pay close attention, you're going to see this and see it very well, not only in yourself, but in other people. It's the rules that we use that end up creating a lot of our problems, or at least making the problems we experience a lot harder than we need to be. Remember, leadership and life itself is hard, but don't make it harder than it needs to be. So coming up in the next video in this short series, I'm going to tell you about what we have learned about the first component of a very wise and vibrant rule of life. That's the put the why before the what rule of life. It's all about consistently applying what you do to a larger context. It's about carefully curating the why behind the what of life. You may already do this to some degree. On a cold Monday morning after a long work and worry-filled weekend, you might wake up to another challenging day, and as you drag yourself out of bed, you mutter, "Why am I doing this to myself?" You have an answer. Is it a good one? So, how's it working for you?